Very good day to you all. Welcome to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Call the Lawyers podcast. My name is Ron Quaranta, chairman of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. Some preliminary notes as we begin. This podcast is not legal or investment advice, and the opinions expressed here are the opinions of the guests only and myself, and not directly related to the opinions or offerings of our firms or organizations. I'm very pleased to bring to the podcast Tyler Harttraft. Tyler, how are you, sir?
Doing great, Ron. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being part of the legal working group as well. Tell us about Bull Blockchain Law. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know the story. I always love to hear it. Tell us how you got involved in the crypto space and what got you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So in law school was actually when I found Bitcoin for the first time, started reading up on it, and it was right around the time where Mt. Gox got hacked. And so that was a really interesting situation. Um, Actually got into mining shortly thereafter. And so I was setting up mining rigs, ASIC miners, Ether miners with GPUs. And really, that was a great learning experience to just start understanding how the technology worked, what was involved from a mechanical standpoint or a technical standpoint. And at the time in law school, I was focusing on transactional and intellectual property law. And so once I graduated, I was working in a firm and really just still following blockchain law and starting to notice that there was activity in the space in the legal industry as far as some comment by the SEC as in the Dow report that came out. And so I started to realize I was meeting people at meetups who were starting companies in this space and really didn't have any legal help. And so it was just an interesting opportunity that presented itself. And so looking at where the space was headed, I noticed that there were going to be a lot of companies that were starting in the space and that would need legal advice. And so it was very underserved at the time. And that led to Bull Blockchain Law, where my business partner and I now are hyper focused on servicing blockchain technology companies and cryptocurrency companies.
Out of curiosity, I don't think I ever had the opportunity to ask you this. Prior to law school, because you had mentioned setting up mining rigs and ASIC chips, which is relatively hardware intensive. Did you study computer science or technology prior to law school, out of curiosity?
I did not, and to be honest, it wasn't as technically involved as you might think. And we had some smart people that we were working with as well,
Yeah.
who could help with the software side of things. But as I don't have a computer science background, but I did do a lot of learning in that time period while we were setting those up. So
Right.
it was very interesting.
Interesting background. You don't usually see that kind of transition. So it's really interesting to hear that. I want to talk a little bit about something that you alluded to here. And I agree with you. I've been involved in the crypto space for a long time like yourself. And I think one of the interesting aspects of it that I've seen from a legal perspective is the shift in perception. And I think you and I talked about this the last time. From a legal perspective, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, there were not law firms with practices focused on blockchain and crypto. And a lot of that kind of thought was, well, this isn't, legitimate, or it's certainly not something we want to focus our practice on. And now most major law firms have practices dedicated to it. There are practices like yours that are almost entirely dedicated to the blockchain and crypto space. Talk to me a little bit about how the demographic of those clients have changed, right? The clients you were talking to in 2016, 2017, 2018 are probably different than the clients in 2020, 2021 for a variety of reasons. NFTs, DeFi's, we'll get into all of those. Have you seen that progression, that maturity from the client perspective? And what do your clients look like now?
You're absolutely right. When we first started, there were no blockchain practice heads, there were no blockchain practice groups, there were no blockchain law firms.
Mhm.
Very rarely you would find a blockchain lawyer or a lawyer. It was maybe a fintech lawyer who was
Right.
now a little bit knowledgeable about the topic, but there wasn't enough work in the space to sustain a practice or a practice group for that matter. So now, fast forward to today, we have clients that are publicly listed companies. They're not just startups anymore. They're later stage emerging companies. You have lots of companies that when they first started, were very optimistic that they would get to this point, but it was a little uncertain at that time. So the clientele has really matured over the years, and it feels like the kids that we grew up with are now all adults. You have Coinbase that just got listed publicly.
Right.
You have other companies following suit with later stage private offerings that are having a lot of success, and they're really taking center stage in the industry and in the broader financial industry as well.
Yep. We'll peel back a little bit and dive into the types of clients as well as the types of industries they're engaged in. Again, we mentioned DeFi, we mentioned NFTs. I do want to talk a little bit about one of the interesting aspects of the legal profession that I've seen, and I wanted your perspective on this. Is a lot of your clients are probably fairly innovative, right? They're involved in this space, they're doing different things in crypto. But one of the challenges becomes that of almost an educator. How do you work to make sure your clients understand the evolving regulatory landscape or the lack of clarity in some instances on the regulatory landscape? And candidly, how do you keep up? That's hard work. I'd be interested from the lawyer's perspective and a practice focused on this. How do you keep up with that?
Absolutely. Well, one of the great things to do is to join groups like this group, the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, and just rely on a good support system of colleagues and constant reading and updating yourself and staying abreast of these developments. So it is a lot of work to stay up on the developments because you have multiple agencies that are releasing new guidance, not only in the U.S. jurisdiction but in other jurisdictions as well. And those jurisdictions are usually need to be considerations for our clients because this is a global marketplace. And so whether our client is based here in the US or somewhere else, those global considerations need to be accounted for. And so it is a challenge to stay up on those developments, but it's certainly something that can be done with the right support systems. And really, the what we try to do is educate our client as soon as they come in the door. And really, we get educated a lot from our clients, which is a great reward because they are coming to us with new solutions and new understandings about how they want things to work, how they want their future to operate. And so it's really a great learning experience for us just to consult with prospective clients or start doing due diligence on new clients. That whole interaction is a learning experience in and of itself. And it really keeps us on top of new technological developments, new ways of looking at things, new ways of even interpret how the law should maybe change and be interpreted.
Right.
And it ends up being a nice give and take.
And the client conversations for you, I would imagine now, and we've had this conversation with other attorneys in our legal working group. It's no longer the ICO kind of cowboy conversation of 2017, where these clients would come in and say that the laws don't apply to them. That's not the tone and tempo of the conversation that we've seen, and I'd love your commentary on that because they are working to comply in a space that's very hard to comply with, given some of the lack of clarity. Do you see that same kind of tone and tempo from clients?
Absolutely. Clients are not looking to avoid the law. They're looking to operate within the bounds, but they understand that there is risks. And so our job is really to define those risk parameters and help them understand where they are now and where they need to go to defray some of that risk and help them understand that at times you're not going to eliminate risk. Yeah, the best you can do sometimes when the regulations are adapting as fast as they are today is really just have a good understanding of what your risk profile is and operate accordingly and try and be proactive about implementing steps and solutions that can really get you to a place where you can be nimble if the regulations do change and you find yourself in a position where you need to make some changes to your protocol or your structure or things like that.
Right. Understood. Uh, let's pivot a little bit. We alluded to this. We talked about regulation and kind of the challenges around evolving and helping evolve and understand regulation. So, new administration. It's now, as of the recording date here, it's May 11th on my computer, 2021. We've got a new SEC chair. Let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm sure you keep up with this news. Gary Gensler now is chair of the SEC. He's been, and I wouldn't call advocate, but he certainly understands blockchain technology. He certainly understands cryptocurrencies. He's taught at MIT, as everyone mentions. What's your perspective on Chairman Gensler at the SEC? And for a variety of reasons, we're seeing ETFs queued up in the United States. I think we're up to 8 now. You might know more than me, the number. Do you think this is a good thing for the crypto and blockchain space? And what are your thoughts about how that evolves?
I think anytime you have a regulator with as much experience as the new commissioner, it's going to be a good thing for the industry. Now, whether that comes in the form of clarity because we now have regulation that's more prohibitive or clarity because we have regulation that is more lax, I don't know, but at least we will have some clarity about how to operate. And the hope is that we have this forward-thinking commissioner in Mr. Gensler, who, like you said, taught at MIT. So he has the experience, he has the knowledge. He's a very smart guy, and he is going to get in there. He's going to make changes, and he's going to make decisions on these ETFs that, like you said, are backed up, which we hope. I know the industry is hoping that there an approval coming soon, because there hasn't been in so far for all the applications that have been stacked up. But what a development that would be for the industry to have an ETF approved. But yeah, to speak to Gensler, I think we are going to get clarity in some form or another. But I think anytime you have someone with that much experience, it usually bodes well.
Yeah. Let's peel that back a little bit, because I think there are a couple of interesting trends we've spoken about in many of our working group meetings and other separate meetings as well. Given that backdrop of Commissioner Gensler, this fear in industry is regulation by enforcement. And we can get into some very specifics, but is it your anticipation that regulation by enforcement is not something we're going to see more of, or do you have any transparency or thoughts about that?
So I hope that we see less of it, but this time reminds me very much of 2017, when there were a lot of ICOs,
Right.
too many to even keep track of. Now we're seeing the same rapid development in the DeFi space, and it concerns me that we could see enforcement, uh, action by enforcement from a different agency, maybe by FinCEN, as
Right.
opposed to the SEC. We have FATF regulate guidance that is on the docket for approval in June.
Yep.
And so if that the most recent draft has taken aim at DeFi and NFTs, and it's not only that they're considering regulating these types of organizations or projects, it's that they are aware of them and they most likely will regulate them. And so my hope is that we receive some clarity from FinCEN if they do decide to implement those suggestions from FATF,
Yep.
and that it's not this repeat that we saw with the SEC, where it was action by enforcement. Uh, but we'll see. It's hard to tell right now, but it reminds me, it's very akin to back in 2017, when the ICO frenzy was happening.
Yep. Yeah. No, interesting point. Tyler, I want to let's peel back the layers on that as well. One of the things we've seen in this space for several years, particularly when we talked about ICOs and beyond any new token offerings, from the legal perspective, everyone throws out Howey test, and for all of the world of non-lawyers, for many, it was the first time they had heard Howey test. And I would argue that the conversation and the importance of Howey test has evolved as well, because what we've seen from regulators, and you've heard me use this phrase, so I apologize for using it again, appropriately decentralized. And I think in the context of decentralized finance, which we're seeing more and more of, and that you alluded to, that's critical. What's your perspective on what do regulators mean when they say appropriately decentralized? And is this a challenge for your clients?
It's certainly a challenge because there is no set definition yet. I think it's going to be incumbent on us as lawyers and people like yourself as thought leaders to work that definition and to make sure that it is one that is suitable for the industry. That we come to an agreement, because right now there is not an agreement. There is no precedent as to what sufficiently decentralized is. As lawyers, that's what we do. We look to precedent, we look to court decisions, we look to statutes for interpretation. We don't have a definition from a statute. We don't have a court case where a judge interpreted the definition. And so we're all a little bit in limbo with this term.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's so important for us as practitioners to be proactive in making sure that constructing that definition, we're all involved in constructing that definition to the benefit of the industry. So I think, we're going to look at things like, if you're looking at a token project, you might look at how many nodes are operating, how many participants are involved. Is it, just a collective of a core group of individuals who are holding all of the tokens, or is it a dispersed community that has a distributed ownership? Things like that. Who owns the intellectual property? Is it a company, or that could just be one of the factors. So I think there's a few things that you can look at concretely, but we all just need to come to an understanding about how those scales tip in the balance.
Right. And I think one of the many conversations that we've had when you talk about this kind of decentralization concept is the word governance. And what I mean by that is it's forced the legal profession, the accounting profession, the technology profession, entrepreneurs globally to really give thought to how is governance managed in a decentralized finance world, for example, in DeFi world. And that's one of the many features that I would argue are new from the legal profession perspective. Understanding, you don't necessarily need to be a technologist, but you do need to understand how these models and these ecosystems are meant to work. Would you agree with that, or is there, or is it simpler than that?
No, I would agree with that. Blockchain is complicated because it bridges several different disciplines: governance,
Yeah.
finance, and technology. And so you're bringing people with expertise together to understand and to formulate projects around this technology. And so having all those working knowledge about those disciplines is very important. And so governance in itself is critically important because it's a huge basis for how these projects are going to operate or are currently operating. We have, just as an example, we have the DAO law that was just passed in Wyoming, which is
Yep.
a great development. And so governance is a key aspect of that law, and it really lays out how decentralized autonomous organization can operate under state law without being governed or looked at as a partnership, which is critically important for these new projects that really have amorphous structures, but really cannot bear the liability that comes along with being characterized as a partnership.
Right, right. And to your point earlier, you've been participating in some of our work streams, that correspondence with regulators around the world. And we've recently submitted our response to the special purpose broker dealer submission from the SEC. We're looking at the Financial Action Task Force response and these others. And I would argue, and I think you agree, that that kind of constant engagement with regulators, which they're much more willing to do than say 5, 6 years ago, we think is critically important as well. I want to look at a specific case, and if you're interested in talking about it, because it's going back and forth quite a bit. Let's talk about the Ripple case.
Absolutely, yeah.
We didn't talk about it much last time when you and I did this, but I think it's important because it's interesting to see that perspective, this idea and this argument. And if you could pull apart the argument a little bit, Ripple has come back and said that, well, the SEC didn't give them fair warning, or some phraseology that I'm sure I'm screwing up, but that they had engaged with the regulator for years, and that at some point along the line, the regulator just sanctioned them. Can you describe that a little more for the audience and what your position or thoughts about that kind of approach are?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I just to full disclosure, I haven't read that response, but I have read the SEC complaint, so I'm familiar with all of the allegations. Um, so, what they're arguing is that they didn't have notice of their requirements and that they had to abide by. And the SEC is saying, yes, you did. We have these securities laws that have been in place since the Howey test was formulated, and that was many years ago. And so, really, everyone is on notice that they have to comply with that rule. Now, what token projects are arguing is that rule does not quite fit what is happening here um, with what is being sold. And so, the core argument that Ripple is advancing really is that they didn't have the proper notice that what they were doing would be considered in violation of the securities laws, or that the SEC was not really operating in good faith with them when they were
Mm.
collecting information from them and trying to work towards an agreement between the two. And so they kind of feel like the rug was pulled out from underneath them.
Yeah. Is the good faith argument a hard one to win against a regulator, in your opinion?
I think in this circumstance, it will probably be a difficult one to win for Ripple. I mean, obviously they're a very well funded company, but based on the merits of the case, it seems like the SEC has a strong case against them based on their complaint and the manner in which XRP was sold to investors and all of the actions that the XRP founders took. It seems like a tough case for Ripple to overcome, in my opinion, just based off what we've seen thus far from other cases like Kick and Telegram, which are distinguishable, but
Right.
obviously, things didn't pan out very well in those
It's interesting.
circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting, the argument around, or the contention that they're trying to protect investors as a broad overarching theme, which totally makes sense, and which the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, we agree that makes sense. when you look at the institutional space or the investors who were in Ripple, their counter argument is, well, you destroyed a whole bunch of investors when you did this because you basically wiped out billions of dollars in worth. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. And we have no particular economic or interest in the XRP case. I know you don't either. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. We have this conversation quite a bit in the legal working group. I want to talk a little bit about the latest, big deal, which is NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I don't know. Do you have clients involved in the NFT space? Can you peel that back for us a little bit and what your thoughts are on NFTs?
We do. We're seeing a lot of interest in developing NFTs as well as developing, I'd say more interest in developing marketplaces for NFTs. So, the next wave of exchanges could be NFT exchanges, which obviously implicates various regulations. You have it implicates AML, KYC regulations, possibly consumer protection regulations. And so there's a lot to be considered as far as how to spin up these exchanges in a compliant manner, especially when you need to consider what the NFTs actually represent. So ensuring that the platform is only offering NFTs that don't give some right to a profits interest or a basket of rights to an economic interest is very important, because otherwise you're dealing with a broker dealer regulation and licensing scheme.
Is it going to be a bit more difficult from the perspective of NFTs when we look at NFT marketplaces or potentially NFT exchanges? Because what we've argued is that every NFT, I mean, there's an entire suite of different families of NFTs, right? You can make a logical argument NFT art, and we've seen Beeple, for example. But we're beginning to see an evolution of NFTs into some pretty exotic stuff. Um, from real estate, for example, to NFT security offerings, to I forgot, I might be IBM looking to embed IP or copyrights into NFTs. We're even beginning to see, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, capital raising leveraging NFTs. And there's this deep concern that, are we looking at ICOs 2.0, ICOs embedded in an NFT? What are your thoughts in that space, and what are the risks for some of these marketplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big risk is if you end up selling a security inadvertently without really
Right.
realizing what was attached to the NFT. That is a big risk, because obviously, as we've seen from the SEC enforcement actions, just against token issuers, not even getting into exchanges and how they're regulated, there's a lot of regulation there as far as what requirements. So if you're a broker dealer and you're issuing, and you are going to be one if you're issuing an NFT that is a security, there are a slew of requirements as far as internal procedures and protocols that you need to develop, licensing and registration with the SEC and FINRA, and that's a really heavy lift, especially if you are maybe a newer company that doesn't realize they're triggering this compliance requirement. And so I see that as one of the biggest risks. Um, the other risks I see are really opportunities for scams, like we saw with
Mm,
ICOs, which is unfortunate. But that anytime there's a new technology, people will take advantage of it. But as far as your honest operations and outfits, I think that broker dealer risk is probably the most significant.
mm.
Otherwise, we're looking at just primarily focusing in on terms and conditions in your contract on your website, ensuring that you are communicating the sale in terms of the sale properly, and the asset properly.
Right. When we look at that in a more granular way, one of the interesting aspects of it is, we've joked for many years. We have a lot of lawyer friends, you and I, and you've been in the space for a while. The idea of smart contracts. I would argue that NFTs and kind of auditing NFTs and kind of understanding the smart contracts behind some of the capabilities there, does that make the legal profession? Does it make it more difficult for the lawyer to do their job? Right? At what level does it stop becoming a technology conversation about a platform, a token? And at what point does it become a legal, I need to understand how this NFT or your smart contract works? Do you get engaged at that level? Do you have any perspective on that?
We do, yeah. It's certainly highly intertwined. So it becomes very difficult to parse that out if the client and you can't come to an agreement as to how the technology and the legal parameters really interact. So that is an intimate conversation of one with us and the client, where we really just drill down on, you know, what does this part of the technology actually do, and how do we extrapolate that in a legal world? How will that be interpreted from a legal contract perspective? And we need to make that jive, because if it can't be understood by, you know, a purchaser or your layman or a judge even, then that could cause a problem in the future, because there could be issues with misrepresentation. There could be issues with, um, you know, telling relaying to people how this is how things are supposed to function. And so you want to make sure that you have those conversations early on, and that you're both on the same page about how things are being interpreted from a presentation standpoint and from a consumer standpoint.
Got it. Understood. Appreciate that perspective. Interestingly, also, and I suspect you believe likewise, many of the conversations we have, we argue across law, accounting, technology, banking, finance, that these are big generational shifts, fundamentally reinventing how financial markets work, fundamentally reinventing what it means to be a contract and what a smart contract is. And because of that, a lot of the conversations we have are with students in law schools, students in technology schools, for example, many of them associates of the WSBA. How do you describe to folks that are beginning in the legal profession what they should focus on and how they should get involved? And I know that's a pretty broad question, but do you have advice for legal students in the space that, what got you to where you are and what you would recommend to them?
Sure. I think just, the fact that they're interested this early in their career is a great step. I think joining groups like WSBA and then other groups, there's plenty of other groups out there, just to immerse yourself in this industry, meet people, learn new concepts. There's a lot of educational support out there, educational resources. So, MIT publishes things, Stanford publishes things, Harvard. So there's a lot of resources out there, and you can really take it, you know, one bite at a time. It's like drinking from a fire hose a lot of times. But I would say that don't get overwhelmed. Just try to just putting yourself in the space is a good start, and just making sure that you are trying to understand. I think what helped me was understanding the technologies first, but not on an incredibly deep level, just on a basic economic, governance and functional level. And so that really gave me the ability to go out and speak to clients with a confidence about understanding their project, really getting to the heart of what they're trying to do. And then I could also speak to the legal side, because we're lawyers at heart first, and so we understand that area first. But we do need to have a baseline education on how the technology interacts, and so bringing those two sides together is really the important part.
I think, yeah, and I agree with you. And I think one of the interesting things we always say is the first question to ask is, what is it used for? And all of the legal and technology and product and business conversations come out of those fundamental why questions, I think. No, this is great, Tyler. Really, thank you so much. I'd love to hear about people's work day. So I have to ask, you're out in Philly, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm halfway between Philly and New York, so I'll have to get down to Philly at some point. But I'd love to hear a day in the life of the folks at Bull Blockchain Law. What does that look like? And how's your firm growing?
It's going really well. It's a lot of intakes right now, actually, which is good. It's a fast paced time, so I'd say an average day is trying to get a couple of things out the door first, and then diving into emails and calls and meetings with clients. Pretty standard stuff. Nothing too exciting. I wish it was more exciting than that, but sometimes the status quo is good, I guess.
Yep.
But yeah, a lot of conversations, because as we spoke about, there's a lot of gray area out there, and so it's sharing ideas, it's answering questions, it's that give and take of that education between us and the client. And so a lot of conversations being had throughout the day usually,
And a lot of coffee.
and a lot of coffee, of course.
Well, Tyler, this is great. Obviously, we'll post in the show notes. This will be posted to our members on the WSBA YouTube channel. How can folks reach you? How can they ask you questions? How can they learn more about Bull Blockchain Law?
Sure. Yeah, they can go to our website. It's just bullblockchainlaw.com. My Twitter is on there. My email is on there. They can learn more about us on the site and on Twitter. We're tweeting updates about regulatory developments, and yeah, all the contact information is online.
So the last time we did this, I'll leave off with one last thing. I asked about predictions. Again, for the audience or anyone who watches this, nothing is investment, legal, banking, accounting advice at all. And the last predictions we made were about ETFs. I'm going to be a pain in the neck about this one. What's your next prediction? But it can't be an ETF prediction.
Can't be an ETF prediction. Okay. Dogecoin is going to go to $1.
What?
No, I don't actually believe that.
Did you watch the Saturday Night Live with Elon? I'm assuming you're not a buyer.
I did. I'm not a buyer, and I think a bunch of people are mad at me for saying that they shouldn't buy Doge, and watching it go from 6 cents to 50 cents. But
Yep.
I still stand by that. But I did watch the Saturday Night Live. I found it very entertaining.
It was.
Elon's a character, and I just love his Doge personality. I love his Twitter personality. It's all fun.
He is an interesting character. Well, Tyler, this was great. Thank you all for watching WSBA.call the Lawyers podcast. We'll have you back. We're looking forward to having you on other meetings, Tyler. We'll leave it there and looking forward to chatting again soon.
All right, thanks, Ron.
Cheers.